Hello everyone, thanks for joining me today. I'm Alexandra Johnston and I'm an Associate Lecturer with the Williams Centre for Learning Advancement at the University of Melbourne. For this presentation today, I'll focus on one of the key findings from my PhD research, Designerly Leadership, Developing Teaching Quality through the Sustainable Design of Peer Review of Teaching Programs. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll touch on the literature review, aim, study design, findings, and implications for practice. To begin with a review of the literature. In my review, I looked at how peer review of teaching influenced teaching development in higher education. I used a methodologically inclusive research synthesis, and this review was published in Heard in 2020. This figure represents the factors emerging from the review. A few definitions to begin with. Organisational factors are defined as attributes within organisations that support teaching development to occur. The organisation, I think, to a larger degree, determines how the program will be led across disciplinary cultures and contextually specific requirements. Factors at the organisational level included the context of the discipline, levels of organisational collegiality, and this was quite key, this next finding. Clear, transparent, communicative leadership was positively related with program sustainability. Now, program factors are defined as the overall structure of the program and the design of the various components. Now, these factors, I think, are also central to determining program engagement and achieving teaching development outcomes. Program factors included the peer review framework, such as whether it was mandated or voluntary, the design of the program, such as whether there were training modules in how to observe and how to engage in reflective practice, and whether there were elements included in the program, such as pre and post meetings to support teaching development conversations, for example. Individual factors are defined as individuals' unique, inherent characteristics that might influence their experience of peer review of teaching. These factors included the prior experience of academics and their perceived development requirements. So, for example, if they perceived the peer review program was in alignment with their professional development needs, they were more likely to engage with that program. This figure illustrates the theoretical framework I developed for the study following the systematic review. Here, peer review of teaching is understood as a teaching development input within higher education, where a number of factors and enabling processes can influence scholarly teaching development. You can see here that this study is situated within the scholarship of teaching and learning literature, and I'll draw on that in a moment, as well as looking at the socio-cultural theoretical framework that underpins the study. In terms of the study aim, I aimed to identify teaching academics' experiences of a peer review of teaching program, and I also wanted to examine how those experiences might evidence teaching quality development through fostering scholarly approaches to teaching. The main research question I asked is, how does engagement in peer review of teaching influence academics' scholarly teaching? And to answer this question, I asked three sub-questions. Firstly, starting with that funnel approach and narrowing down, what are academics' experiences generally of peer review? What do they perceive to have changed in their teaching as a result of having engaged in peer review of teaching? And what role does peer review of teaching have in the development of scholarly teaching for academics? The key terms within this study sit more broadly within the scholarship of teaching and learning and literature. These definitions here are working definitions. Some of them are highly contested, but they form helpful foundations for this research nonetheless, and I'll discuss these briefly. Peer review of teaching I'm considering for the purpose of this study is a continuing professional development where academics provide feedback on each other's practice to improve the quality of teaching. And teaching quality also deserves a look in here. It's where we engage in these pedagogical or andragogical processes such as curriculum design, learning and teaching frameworks and philosophies, and assessment and feedback practices. to achieve or support achieving student learning outcomes. And we're defining scholarly teaching here as this teaching informed by evidence-based approaches, grounded in the scholarly literature. Touching on the study design. Social constructionism is the epistemological foundation for this research, and this epistemology situates theory building as a process of interacting with the interpretations and understanding of both myself as the researcher and the participants in my sample. I used case study method combined with constructivist grounded theory methodology. Within this approach, I used sociocultural theory, which argues that individual understandings are mediated within social contexts. Now, sociocultural theory was adopted with the view that the development of scholarly teaching is a social phenomenon that occurs between academics within peer review of teaching contexts. This makes it a useful theoretical framework in building an understanding of the degree to which study participants' engagement with peers might support their scholarly teaching development. This figure shows the case study design. The larger circle signifies the bounded setting of the large Australian research-intensive university. It also signifies peer review of teaching as the phenomenon of the study. The smaller circles you can see here represent the multiple cases, 7 faculties and 31 participants within those faculties. Now, within those circles, you can see we've got 4 HASS faculties, Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences, and 3 STEM faculties, Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics. And HASS and STEM were used to de-identify participants. Now, there was a 2-tiered approach to peer review in this context, guided by university governance. The plus symbol you can see indicates Tier 1 involvement. The tilde symbol you can see indicates Tier 2 involvement, and the asterisk indicates Tier 1 and Tier 2 involvement. In terms of the peer review program design, the 2-tiered approach can be understood as Tier 1, led by departments at a local level, which was colleague to colleague, and Tier 2 was a cross-university program led by the Central Teaching and Learning Unit, and there was a college of expert reviewers appointed to do those reviews. In this next section, I'll take a pragmatic approach to peer review with a focus on the richness of the educator's experiences. I've included this table to provide an overall view of the initial findings from the thematic analysis mapped across each of the research questions. Now, while these findings from the initial thematic analysis offered informative insights to emergent associations between phenomena, this data warranted further exploration. So I built on these findings from the thematic analysis using design thinking analysis. And this step was key to surfacing the enabling processes within the theoretical framework. I'll now discuss these findings in tandem, beginning with a brief overview of the design thinking process. For the post-thematic analysis, I used the design thinking tool of empathy mapping. The 6 main questions illustrated on this empathy map provided the infrastructure that supported building a picture of key participant characteristics, where I gained a much more nuanced view of the findings from the initial analysis. This process supported refining the main themes identified through thematic analysis that you saw in the table. It also helped me to bring a creative visual approach to the analysis, which made the data more accessible and useful. The key participant characteristics unearthed through this process can be understood as archetypes. An archetype is a broad set of participants based on their common characteristics, such as their knowledge, skills and behaviours. Archetypes are therefore embodiments of universal stories across the study participants. Now, the purpose of these archetypes is to evoke aspirations of what scholarly teaching might look like. In evoking our aspirations, the archetypes become models we're likely to desire and pursue. These archetypes are contextually bound as they surface from the data emerging from this case study. This figure illustrates the result of the refinements of the main themes identified through the thematic analysis at the organisational, program and individual level and the related archetypes. Now, from a sociocultural perspective, at the organisational level, the valued teacher and the collegiate teacher archetypes are expressions of academics' experiences of peer review of teaching within the broader context. And this aligns with research question 1, which was to understand academics' experiences. At the program level, the observer teacher and the reflective teacher archetypes form expressions of how academics talked about the changes to their teaching, which aligns with research question 2. At the individual level, the continuously improving teacher archetype is an expression of academics' perceptions of the role of peer review in the development of their scholarly teaching, and this aligns with research question 3. I'll touch on these archetypes briefly now using representative participant quotes. Through these quotes, we gain a picture of the valued teacher archetype. Here we see there's a question of value, of not necessarily being acknowledged by leadership in their teaching specialist role. These academics can feel compromised by a lack of leadership support for peer review of teaching and a lack of value of teaching quality more broadly. For some of these academics, this question of value also comes down to the lack of value they hold for peer review of teaching by referring to it as a box-ticking exercise. It's almost like there was an absence of protective factors set in place by leadership or a missing safeguard for these academics to experience feeling valued. These quotes offer a picture of the collegiate teacher archetype. Now, notwithstanding this lack of value, the collegiate teacher experiences collegiate cultures that were affirming and supportive. These academics develop their scholarly teaching when they reach out to colleagues for their teaching-related query. And this occurred not only through the peer review of teaching program and those peer partnerships, but beyond and as an extension of that program. When these academics connect, engage and interact with each other, these collegiate cultures that were formed were enabling for these academics. It's almost like this was a protective factor or a safeguard set in place by leadership for these academics to develop in this way. Through these representative quotes, we gain a picture of the observer teacher archetype. Now we've moved down into the program level here. These academics develop their teaching-related knowledge, skills and behaviours when they have time allocated and leadership support to observe others' teaching practices. They view observation as evidence-based practice and embed this as an important process in their development. These quotes offer a picture of the reflective teacher archetype. These academics actively seek out and engage in reflective practice. As a result, they experience learning about their teaching. They view reflection as an evidence-based practice, but here is an example of reflexive practice because they use data they gather through their reflective practice for the purpose of adjusting and improving their teaching. And that's an indication of reflexivity happening here. The scholarly practices of observation and reflection were enabled through affordances put in place by leadership, affordances which formed the backbone of the peer review of teaching program design. This affordance supported academics to engage in an evidence-based discourse as part of that peer review process. In terms of the continuously improving teacher at the individual level, now these academics develop their scholarly teaching when they deliberately engage in formal and informal learning about teaching. Now, for some of these academics, there was programs embedded, training programs embedded within the overall program that helped them to understand what teaching and learning was all about. But these academics also demonstrated volition in accessing evidence-based resources, including studying the scholarship of teaching and learning through opt-in coursework. This in turn equips them with the language to talk about teaching and supports them to shift to a student-centred perspective. They demonstrate agency in embedding evidence-based approaches to making adjustments to their teaching. So, what supports and sustains these factors? I argue that there are enabling processes occurring within this context that do support and sustain these factors. And this red circle you can see indicates where the enabling processes sit within the theoretical framework. This figure illustrates those enabling processes that support the development of scholarly teaching capabilities. These enabling processes offer a framework for conceptualising how the development of scholarly teaching can be supported within a sociocultural model. Since peer review of teaching functions across multiple contexts, the manifestation of this relational nature is complex. At the organisational level, through that darker coloured square there, through the valued teacher and collegiate teacher archetypes, we learn about the importance for leaders to protect or safeguard opportunities to develop scholarly teaching through peer review. For example, when academics experience feeling valued by leadership and feel part of safe collegiate environments, leadership can be seen to be cultivating the enabling conditions for academics to actively engage in peer review environments that support their scholarly teaching development. And this is often supported through policy initiatives. At the program level, through the observer teacher and reflective teacher archetypes, and you can see these in the mid-grey coloured box there, we learn about the importance for leaders to afford opportunities to engage in the evidence-based processes of observation and reflection through program design. This cultivates the conditions to engage in an evidence-based discourse as part of peer review. At the individual level, denoted by that white box you can see through the continuously improving teacher, we learn about the importance for leaders to offer opportunities for academics to develop capabilities important to scholarly teaching. Now, for individuals to fully realise and integrate information generated through that scholarly discourse, academics need leadership support to access sustained opportunities to engage in learning about the scholarship of teaching and learning through teaching courses in order to engage with evidence-based strategies to apply their learnings by adjusting their teaching through sustained continuous improvement. Peer review of teaching implementation often comes from pragmatic institutional motivations regarding teaching quality development rather than aspirations to advance theory. Therefore, conceptualising peer review of teaching through sociocultural theoretical perspectives on human activity and learning aligns with the aim of this study, which is to surface deeper understandings of the mechanisms that help explain how participation in peer review of teaching influences academics' scholarly teaching. This forms the theory I have constructed, scholarly teaching capability theory. Where academics engage in these enabling processes, they may be more likely to develop the skills, knowledge and behaviours or scholarly teaching capabilities and apply their learnings meaningfully to their future teaching. So what does this all mean for our practice? I'd like to offer a view of peer review that promotes a responsive approach by tailoring programs to the requirements of academics within the contexts in which they teach. That's because peer review of teaching can be a mix of different approaches across different teaching contexts. There is not one size that fits all, and this presents a challenge for leaders to understand the type of peer review required according to the individual and the teaching environment in order to ensure program sustainability. Given this challenge, I'm proposing a simple tool can assist leaders here, radar charts, also referred to as spider graphs. Radar charts are defined as graphs with multiple scales that are used to report self-assessed capabilities. Graphic measurements can be compared over time to monitor changes or growth across the chosen capabilities. Radar charts are commonly used in the field of organisational development to measure quality. In higher education, these charts have been used to document teaching performance, which makes this a tool well suited to support our assessment of teaching quality development. As indicators of scholarly teaching capabilities, archetypes identified within this case study are included in this radar chart as guides to evoke aspirations of what scholarly teaching might look like. In evoking our aspirations, archetypes become models of scholarly teaching we're likely to desire and pursue, and these aspirations are contextually bound as they surface from the data within this case study. As well as a tool for documenting changes in scholarly teaching over time, these charts can show scholarly teaching capabilities across a group of teaching academics. Here, I've included 3 academics' profiles based on de-identified study participants and their different experiences of developing scholarly teaching through peer review. Ruby, coded in blue, is a senior lecturer teaching in a HASS context, such as an education faculty, who participated in the Tier 1 program. Adhana, coded in orange, is a professor teaching in a STEM context, such as a science faculty, who was in both Tier 1 and Tier 2 programs. And Tan, coded in grey, is a Level A academic teaching in a HASS context, such as a business faculty, who participated in Tier 1. You might notice that Adhana's orange chart is a little fuller than Ruby's blue chart in forming that pentagon-like shape. It is also a little more skewed to the left than that of Ruby's chart, showing less experience of compromise and more of an experience of value within their role. And you'll notice Tan's grey chart is further skewed to the lower left, indicating a stronger focus on continuous improvement. We can use radar charts to better understand scholarly teaching capabilities and the implications of developing these capabilities through peer review of teaching. And I think this is important for leaders. For example, when setting up a peer review observation pairing, a leader in conversation with Tan can support them to be matched with someone who is experiencing a strong sense of value, so that Tan can deliberately engage in building that capability with their peer review partner. In another context, Tan's strong continuous improvement capabilities might be identified by leaders as a strength for the purposes of building that capability with a different peer review partner. We're looking here at locating strengths, not weaknesses. As part of the design thinking process, I tested this prototype with my participants. While their response was overwhelmingly positive, there was a concern that some leaders would take a deficit approach rather than a strengths-based approach, which is not what the charts are designed for. This in turn could promote more of the teacher who feels compromised due to experiencing a lack of messaging from leadership around their value as teaching academics. This is where an exercise in charting scholarly teaching together with academics is valuable for leaders. We know that clear, transparent, communicative leadership is positively related with program sustainability. Good design starts with understanding. When leaders engage in this way, it can be transformative to their understanding of academics and what they need for their scholarly teaching development. Charting capabilities in this way offers leaders an understanding of what it feels like to stand in the place of teaching academics. For leaders, the process of charting scholarly teaching together with academics invites them to walk with academics through their ecosystems, if you like. These charts become a tool for leaders to have conversations with academics about what it means to navigate that place. Over time, these conversations become critically informed and ultimately, potentially, transformative to teaching quality. The result is a vestige of evidence-based knowledge, skills and behaviours, or scholarly teaching capabilities linked to contextually relevant experiences shared between teaching academics and those who lead peer review of teaching programs. Underpinned by the scholarship of teaching and learning literature, this strategy is foundational to incorporating the lived experience of academics who teach, to informing both a shared and locally sustainable understanding of teaching quality. These findings offer an insight into important capabilities that academics enact within peer review of teaching that contribute to scholarly teaching development. And I think these findings also offer a framework for understanding how designerly leaders can support the development of scholarly teaching capabilities through peer review of teaching program design. For any questions or to chat further, please contact me on this email address. I look forward to hearing from you.